You know, friends, 29 days from today is Valentine's Day. Yep, on Tuesday, February the 14th is Valentine's Day. And you can enjoy a heart-shaped pizza with two toppings for only $18.99. That's right, Sorrento's will be making the heart-shaped pizza Valentino with two toppings for only $18.99. So call and reserve your heart-shaped pizza by calling area code 847-455-9440. You can dine in, carry out, or deliver to your door. You can also enjoy a very special 10-ounce steak, ribeye steak, with potatoes, vegetables, soup, and salad for $10.95. And that's at Sorrento's Italian Village, which is located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Once again, their phone number is 847-455-9440. They're open 7 days a week for lunch and dinner, and delivery start at 11 a.m. Now, are you on a budget? Make a resolution to have lunch on Tuesdays at Sorrento's and enjoy an incredible lunch buffet between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Half off regular price when you purchase a beverage. So once again, for Valentine's Day, you can enjoy a heart-shaped pizza with two toppings for only $18.99. You have to call to make do a reserve. Call area code 847-455-9440. Or, once again, if you want a real nice 10-ounce ribeye steak with potato, vegetable, soup, or salad for only $10.95, stop in at Sorrento's Italian Village, 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Their phone number is area code 847-455-9440. And they are located on Manheim Road, just south of Fullerton Avenue on the west side of the street, and they have got a huge, huge parking lot. Be sure you tell them that you heard it on Meet the Chicago Historians.
Let's see if we can do it.
Yeah.
Well, gang, we're back, and we had a little short break. Thank you, John. And we were supposed to go back to Tom Tyler. Are you still here, Tom?
I'm still here.
You are
I'm
here?
still here.
You were holding a thought. Have you held it?
Yeah,
I couldn't hold anything that long.
I wanted to do my impression of President Tyler. See, that was
There you go. That's what you're waiting for, John. Yeah.
Got to do
And
that.
I got a
Tyler
story,
story
too.
too.
Very well, though.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I
you
guess
were-
where I was
you
at
were
was
going for the lights.
right, and it was the end of my shift, like I say, and I was coming home from the radio station, and I went back on Pulaski, and it was really, really cold, I guess, and I was cleaning my windshield off, and I looked behind me, and I kind of like was being approached by black gentlemen, okay? And I thought, oh, this is it. I got to get out of here. So I just got in the car, floored it, and kept going and tried to lose them. And finally I lost them, but I mean, that was terrifying when I came home and thought to myself, what is happening here? You know, why is this happening? And then, like I say, when I went into the service, it was totally different. I mean, it's just like, you know, buddy, and it just, you know, you couldn't believe it was the same situation, you know. So.
Well, I think perhaps, sounds like this, so it's like it's so pedantic or something, but maybe the fact that one gets down to individuals. Like in my 34 years on police department, I worked in busy South Side districts, 48th and Wabash, 29th and Prairie, 15, the old news station, 51st and Wentworth. I worked with a lot of black men and black women, and there were a lot of guys who were great partners, and a lot of, matter of fact, a lot of those old veterans taught you so much. And yet there are also people you wouldn't want to work with again. So they're individuals.
Yeah.
They're individuals.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just like, there are plenty of whites who are the same way. Wouldn't want to work with that jerk again.
No. Yeah.
They probably said that about me too, so we'll get even.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking of the race riots of 1919, there seemed to be more like black gangs versus white gangs. In the 68 riots, it was more random arson and looting, kind of a different tone for these.
It was not a gang situation.
You don't hear gangs in
both
68
gangs.
in the
I mean,
60s,
it wasn't.
right.
Yeah.
One of the clubs
Right.
that was one of the, they would call them clubs, that was involved. I think that they know historically that was involved in the 1919 riots was the Hamburg Athletic Club of Bridgeport,
And the name Daley,
of which a prominent member
yes,
at that time was
Very
Richard
nice.
J. Daley. Now, of course, they said no one could ever, there was no proof or evidence of anything.
Right.
But at least, the fact was that those riots did take place geographically in that area, and I think the Hamburg Club, which was a very, I don't know if it still exists, but it was a
Yes,
very
it does.
prominent. Is there
Yeah.
still
Really?
a Hamburg
Yeah.
Athletic Club?
They
I've
have
read
good
about
hamburgers.
this.
They're good hamburgers too.
And I've read about this in connection
Very
with
German,
with Richard J. Daley that,
Right.
that of course they could have well have been in the mix of that. At
Yeah,
that time.
I often wonder if they were trying to make more of that than what it really was for that particular case, because it was Daley's.
It may well be, yeah. And I do not mean to suggest, I'm not in, because I admired Richard J. Daley, so I'm not in any way impugning or suggesting anything, but just that
And he was a young man, whatever
I've
happened.
read
he was a
I've
young
read
man, right?
accounts of
How
those
old
who
would
are
he have
not
been?
favorable to Mayor Daley, who've made that illusion that I think it's in
How
one
old
of the
would he have
books
been
about
at that time?
But just about 17, I would say.
Yeah, 17.
He was born in
02, I
Born in
believe.
02.
That
Yeah,
sounds about
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that
That was-
section, they always talk about Bridgeport. That was known as Hamburg.
It's Hamburg, right.
Yeah,
Still is,
yeah. Bridgeport was really more around.
Around St. So-and-so's.
Archer. Between Halstead and St. Bridget and Halstead and Ashland.
Did that come from, were there Germans there from the city of Hamburg? I mean, how did that Hamburg, you don't know what the origin of that
No,
was.
I don't know, but that neighborhood is really a mixture right north of there. Lithuanians,
Yes.
St. George's.
Yeah.
That was the
German.
Lithuanica
Yeah.
Street.
Lithuanica is still the street there, and you had a big mixture of Italians, Polish in there. What's the nationality?
Slovenians.
We're gonna put some ethnics in there.
I only mention that because people don't stop and think how many of the suburban townships in Cook County have names with German origins. You've
Oh,
got
yeah.
Bremen,
Oh, yeah.
Schaumburg,
Yeah.
New Trier.
Sure.
These
They're-
are,
it's
these are,
all
these are all
German.
these are Palatine comes from what was called the County Palatine of the Rhine. These all have
Yeah.
have German, and people don't they recite these names without thinking of the origin.
Palatine?
Palatine.
I thought they call it Israel now.
I think there's a letter S in there somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
Mayor Belandic, he's certainly not, Irish. I don't know
he was
exactly.
Croatian.
Croatian.
Yeah.
That's right.
And they had,
Yugoslavian?
yeah, they had their own,
My
and a lot
mother-
of Italians in that ward north of Comiskey Park, Armour
Yeah.
Square. That's all
Oh, just
Italian.
right there, sure.
Yeah, 31st Street. So it's really a mixture.
They were,
of,
oh, sure.
It's
Yeah.
funny, there are some neighborhoods you can go to, and my dad's old neighborhood, Canaryville, was
Yeah.
one of them.
Sure.
And you will go there. Now, Canaryville has really undergone some renaissance in recent years. Places are all
You can't-
been redone. And
You can't buy
not
property
gentrified,
there.
though.
I'll tell you right now.
Usually, like the house at 510 West 45th Place, a second cousin of mine owns now. That has been in the family since like 1881.
Wow.
And it was south of 39th, Pershing Road now, was the city limits. So you could
Yeah.
still build wooden construction then. They
Yeah.
wanted after the fire,
Yeah.
right? And they want stone construction, brick.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
Limit. That was town of Lake.
Was
Town
it?
of
Town
Lake.
of
Yeah,
Lake?
sure. And
Where did Hyde Park, Hyde Township come in there?
State Street was the line.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, and Hyde Park was
That's not a
39th Pershing Road all the way to 138th Street, east of State. Lake was a township, 6 miles by 6, Pershing, 87th, State, and Cicero. That's why 87th and Cicero are still the city
Yeah.
limits.
Well, I'm in we're in Lake Township too, and we're west of Cicero. We're almost to Harlem. Is there 2 Lake Townships now, or
You
Town
know
of
what?
Lake?
That was, I thought, like either Proviso Township.
No, it's not.
or-
I
it
looked,
isn't?
I've checked it. Look at your tax bill.
Within
Well,
the
yeah,
city
you
of
look at your tax.
I won't. No,
bill,
you look at it.
yeah.
Somebody should.
No, you look at it.
I'll look at it. You pay it.
Yeah.
Within,
Death and
I
taxes,
think
right?
within the city of Chicago, I think there are 6 nominal townships. They have no significance. There's no township government, obviously.
Right.
But if you look at the Cook County flag, they have a circle of stars around the seal, and there are, I think, 36 stars, although there are only 30 suburban townships. And the reason is that there are these 6 nominal townships within the city of Chicago that still theoretically exist.
Well, they
except,
do,
as I say,
yeah.
they have no significance.
They're a
And then
measure
there's
of
one
land,
big
is what they
star
are.
for the city of Chicago. So so it's they do still have these townships, at least on the maps, as existing within the city
Yeah,
of Chicago.
and when you go to the map department, room 803, in City
Which is
Hall,
very interesting.
It is very
Yeah.
interesting. You look at those
been
books, and they're divided by townships.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're there. It's a measure of land, no matter what.
Yeah, right.
Whether or not we even think of it, like no matter when you live in.
Yeah.
A lot of our old schools got their name from the township. Proviso, New Trier.
Yeah, Maine.
Um,
Yeah.
and like when you're talking about the county flag
The Cook County flag, yeah.
with the seal. Are you
Right,
sure it's not a sea
right.
lion?
Right. Pardon?
Are you sure it's not a sea lion that's on there? What's the difference? One has ears and
Or a
one doesn't.
sea otter, or he oughter be there.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Cook County flag, really.
I used to do a thing about how many stars are there on, kind of a trick question. How many stars are on the city of Chicago? There's 4 stars on the
Oh,
city of
yeah.
Chicago. How many stars are there on the presidential flag? People think, well, there are 50.
None?
There are 50 stars. There are 1 star for each state. And
Oh.
the story is that when Franklin Roosevelt was president, the presidential flag had 4 stars, 1 in each corner. There's flags for every cabinet officer has a personal flag. There's a personal flag of the vice president. And the president's flag had a star in each corner. Well, during World War II, they create 5-star officers, for the armed forces, which we had never previously had. So you have generals of the Army and fleet admirals who have 5 stars. Their personal flags, because every general officer has a personal flag. Their personal flag, if you're in the Army, it's a red flag with 5 stars on it. Well, Roosevelt, with his aristocratic background, was very big on rank and insignia, and he notified the folks in the department that handles this sort of thing. They have an office of heraldry, that the commander-in-chief is not going to have a flag with fewer stars than his subordinate officers. So what were they going to do? There's this question. Well, what are we going to put? We're going to put 6 stars on the president's flag? What's that going to look like? So they came up with the solution: 48 stars. One for just like the American flag. One for that really meant that he outranked everybody.
Yeah.
But it has a sad ending because the flag was not completed until FDR had died. They didn't complete the design of it with the presidential seal and circled by these stars. So Harry Truman was the first man to actually use this flag. And then, of course, when Alaska and Hawaii came in, there are now 50 stars on the presidential flag.
Well, even Fowler had more stars than I did. How's that? Pretty good?
He certainly did.
Yeah, they're picking. Yeah, they're picking on my dog. I don't mind my family, my wife,
There you
but
go.
my dog.
Fowler does resent
Sam.
this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so
Well, I just got done telling all of you what great stories you're telling and so on, but I thought I'd like to segue back to something. I want to just bring out some facts about Martin Luther King, if you don't mind.
Please.
First of all, possibly none of us are too surprised. He was quite an arrogant man, and not as liked as we try to portray his point of freedom is what he was talking about, and that was a true blue statement. He was born during the Depression, but he was raised very, very wealthy. He had a very good childhood. He was not your typical so-called black child. His dad had an arrogance too, who used to have a little motto in the house: "We don't rent, we buy, and we have no payments on our car," which is a nice way to live.
sure.
but he had that in his way of thinking. He was a little bit better than everybody else. So I like to bring in facts like that to break it down where we see everybody in their highest and best position, but there was another side of him. Very well educated boy, very well, from childhood up. His dad became a pastor at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, one of the biggest, congregations, and his mom was named Alberta, and he also met his wife, whose father was also a pastor at one of the major churches. When she was studying music and that at our better universities, as he went to Moorhead University and Kozar University, and that's how he became where his position of pastor and so on. But I'm keeping this one thought in mind, which is this arrogance. And I'm going to jump over to what I call that freedom ride. That was probably one of the first and most enlightening of the protests when it came to the seeing how you can have your riots and your upsets and so on, and how government and political and who you are can, shake the boat a little bit. There was a college called, of all things, I believe it was the Risk University out in the Alabama area. And a few of the peoples there, very well-educated people, black people, and some neighboring people, maybe a crew of only 20, decided that they're going to stand up for the rights of the black people too. We have Martin Luther King Jr. in our corner, and we're going to get on one of these Greyhound buses or Trailway, and we're going to start going the route of where the worst of worst is in our position, the segregation. And that is exactly what they planned, and it did happen. It started out from Birmingham, and in that timing, when they would stop the buses to go to the churches where they preached, the black churches, they were beaten, the buses were burned, they were stoned. This was just a small group of people, but it was the white people's dominance that came to greet them and meet them and have this in mind. They're going to take care of them. You see how far you're going to get. All right, this continued on, and Martin Luther King would give another great speech and give them incentive, and this group of 20 would get on the bus, okay? Now they're down to Alabama in, where were they? Oh, Montgomery, Alabama. And these beatings are getting more vicious. The police are, in on the beatings, and they didn't really do anything. It's just that we don't like you. We don't want you here. Get out of our town. Which led them to being arrested and put in jail and abused and so on and that. Now I'll bring you down to the third area. They were also told when they get back on the bus, they will be protected, which took in Montgomery the National Guard to be called out to protect them.
Right.
And what they did was give them the feeling that as we get out of town and we get to the border of the next town, we let you out. We don't know what's going to happen to you right there, but that's our job, to get you through that city or the state they stayed in, but the cities, okay? In the meantime, again, Martin Luther King was giving his speeches at all the churches where they attended and giving them all this hope. Well, when it was time to get into Mississippi, which was then Jackson, Mississippi, they approached Martin Luther King now, as much as, well, you can see what's happening to us. How about you getting on the bus with us? And he kept giving his speech and bypassing what they said. How about you getting on the bus with us? And he refused. And that hasn't been written, that he refused. And they started to see him, as they put it, with clay feet. He was not sounding and looking like the guy that they were believing in, you know.
I think that recent PBS documentary on the freedom rides makes that point about King unwilling,
Is that right?
as he, I think, early on counseled against the freedom rides as being too provocative. He wanted to continue with the Gandhi tradition of nonviolence, and he was really goaded and impelled to give the freedom riders some support, what was essentially a new generation of civil rights activists motivated and got into the freedom. The Stokely Carmichael, you might say.
He would, yes, you're perfectly right.
King was not willing to
something
get on the
now
bus.
happening where this was not as clear as it was in the beginning, you know. In fact, he turned to then our Attorney General Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, is that Robert Kennedy?
Robert Kennedy,
and who really didn't know where to place this story of, you know, protecting him and that, and I believe he didn't even have some rights of where he could come into this story. He could probably call people and make arrangements, but he couldn't like make a law of something. He didn't have these that power yet. And so he dealt with their governor, Patterson, who was a true racist. I mean, he was all for beat 'em up, get rid of them any way you can, you know.
Right.
And so King himself was fighting between the governor, who would give him kind of a feeling of help, but he knew he was not going to help, and then Kennedy, who could have helped but wasn't too clear about wanting to get involved. You know, the
They kept that
political
Southern support in mind, right?
the political side of the
Politics, you know, politics is interesting. One of the things that people are amazed if you tell them this, that his father, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., was a lifelong Republican. And I think Martin Luther King Jr. early in his days had also been a Republican. You tell people that today, and we think of black voters being overwhelmingly Democrat. But from the time of the Civil War down to the 1950s, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. And those blacks who were able to vote, overwhelmingly voted Republican. There had been some movement away from that under FDR,
Right.
but even that was mainly just FDR. And by the 50s, many of these voters had returned to their traditional loyalty of voting for the Republican Party because Lincoln had been the great emancipator.
And Reconstruction. And
Sure.
Yeah.
And remember the Democratic Party, you know, all these Southern politicians were all Democrats, and there was this dichotomy in the Democratic Party between Northern liberals and Southern conservatives, and that was this kind of tacit union was the basis of their strength. So that for many of them, they saw the Democratic power structure in these states as being their enemies. So it's just when you tell people that his father was a lifelong Republican, they say, you know, what could you be talking about? How could that be? Well, that's because things were quite different in those.
Yeah. And of course that made controversy, didn't it? I mean, from either way, our group, our troop isn't going to protect your troop, and so they had their own little civil war among themselves in the South. But when they got to Jackson, Mississippi, they were very, very mistreated, to a point of being jailed, not in what you'd call an ordinary jail. They were actually sent to the Parchman prison, hard labor, and this prison, it's new to me, but in name, but it was supposedly the worst and most vicious of treatment, and the women were treated very, very badly. That, you know, we're all part of this system of fighting for their rights. And that is finally when Bobby Kennedy stepped in and passed some kind of law where, one, release them, two, we're going to end this, you can't be in the white people's territory. And but what they learned out of it was that Martin Luther King himself really did not practice what he preached.
Well, wasn't he, maybe, could you say he was largely a product of the media, too? That
He was a-
he had led that bus boycott, and
Right,
you know.
and again, as Jan said, in respect to the whole controversy, there was politics, there was religion, there was the man on the street reaction. It brought so many, types into where he fit for his future. This was another problem, and so within that whole dynamic of their sincerity and their beatings and their awful the way they were treated and that they were really not, I don't want to say they were being lied to, but they were within their heart being lied to until they got to the end of that Freedom March to realize that
Yeah,
he was
they couldn't change the laws that quickly.
not
What
at
was it?
all,
No.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he gave them a false hope. Maybe that would be a good word.
Yeah, well,
I don't
could
know.
Be, yeah.
But he also had his own plans. But his arrogance always kept him feeling, I understand what you're going through. I've never gone through it, but I'm still better than you. And that did make a great dent in the historical part.
And the argument's been made, too, that by the middle 60s, when King got involved in the protest marches in Chicago, and especially just before his death in Memphis, when he got involved in the local garbage workers strike.
Yeah, right, the sanitation workers,
right,
yeah.
that he was really losing his focus that he seemed to
There
have
you go.
set from the early 60s.
Yeah.
I was going to say that at that time there was some kind of conference, and they ignored him completely. And they kind of ignored him because he wasn't moving fast enough for a lot of people. Obviously not for the super militant, but most
Right.
everybody else. And then comes an assassination. And when someone is killed, just the way John Kennedy was, you're remembered in such a way. It adds to a sort of a mystique. Or,
Right.
Yeah.
They always remember the
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Like Kennedy. Would Kennedy have been reelected?
Yeah.
Was he,
Good point.
It's an open question.
We don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Exactly.
the assassination, the end, life ending that quickly, you don't know how to react to it.
Particularly
No.
young, yeah,
No.
particularly a young man.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
a man as young as Kennedy, or in the case of King, someone that
Yeah,
young.
no,
39?
that is
It
not
freezes-
fair.
it
That
freezes
isn't right.
everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It stopped history right there. Although he did say that he was, of all the places he had been, however, Chicago was his worst experience.
He never felt more
He
hate
never-
than he did on
yes,
the streets
Yeah.
of Chicago.
yes,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
So
So,
Yeah.
he said.
Yeah.
on a personal basis, I would not know
Now,
what that.
before we mention Marquette Park, which I live very close to, I can tell you back to when I was in the Scouts, like 1954. Scouts will have something they call a powwow every year in their district. They go and they camp out wherever it might be, right? This was in Marquette Park, we were. And we had black churches that had troops and whatever there. They were camping there. Nobody said anything about it.
Yeah.
It was just quietly done. They came in, we had a weekend, and we went. They had black people would come in and use the golf facilities. Not a lot of people, but then once again, no big deal. But when someone comes out with a bunch of banners and we're going to march, you're stirring up something.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, the people who were arrested around Marquette Park were from far away from it.
Yeah,
That's often
they
the
weren't.
case,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Also, the previous march was at Gage Park.
Gage
They
Park,
walked
Yes.
along Garfield Boulevard to Western, and there was, and I think the very fact that there were police escorts and et cetera, that people resented that, and they were also up in my neighborhood, John. You remember Belmont and Central? It was not necessarily the racial, but it was about redlining, et cetera. But they had police protection, and they pushed people off the sidewalk and all that. They wouldn't let them march down the street, but so there was some resentment that.
redlining. Now, there's a whole topic itself. for
Yeah, I know.
redliners.
Yeah. And redlining is an economic thing. Really. I talked to, and I'm going to mention his name. still lives, as far as I know, lives in the 2100 block of Clark Street, which is where the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. When he bought a townhouse there, an old building, probably built in the 1880s, he couldn't get a mortgage. It was redlined.
Because of that massacre. What's wrong with you?
Because of the massacre. Yeah, they're liable to come back. The building was gone already.
They
But
figured Tony Curtis and
right.
they might be
Yeah.
coming back.
Yeah.
Marilyn
But he
Monroe.
couldn't believe it, and I'm not going to
Jack
mention the
Lemmon,
bank,
right,
but because it was too close to Cabrini Green, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, no one knows, and the neighborhood is
It
now
was
gentrified.
there,
You know, you know, but part of that is landmark status.
Not only
too.
that, they got, higher economic people came back.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
Well, I witnessed the timing for a transition of the black student going to the north side schools.
Yeah.
You know, because sometime our moves are to go, you know, to bring us into an area that's kind of virgin-like and never going to have problems, and, you know, you're living better and so on. And it happened, I was visiting a friend of mine, and her school was chosen as one of the first schools that a grammar school child could go to.
Where they
And-
bust in.
Where they busted
Busted
in,
in, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I witnessed what I thought was outrageous. A bunch of everyday mothers
Yeah.
waiting for that bus, you know, waiting.
Yeah.
What were you going to do to that child who doesn't even...
Yeah. Has no idea what. Yeah.
I could not believe it.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of that restaurant in Georgia.
In Georgia. Yeah.
I mean, it just brought back that
What we saw
feeling.
in Little Rock in 1957
There you
when
are.
Yeah.
There you
Eisenhower
are.
Yeah.
was stepping
you
with the
know,
National
just,
Guard. Right.
little moments of your life can start being connected, you know.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
hard to. Yeah. It's
I
hard
mean, when
to,
you think now of, well, so they go to that school.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah.
You know.
And,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
I
yeah,
know,
I mean,
I know.
and made so much out of it. you
Yeah.
know, to
Yeah.
a child.
Yeah.
And how is the child?
What year was Martin Luther King assassinated? What year was
68.
that?
68.
68.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I had a very dear friend, and Ken, you're going to know the man as soon as I
Yeah.
mention his name. He was a division marshal over at Wilcox and
Oh.
Pulaski.
Pulaski, the old
Sure.
firehouse.
Pulaski.
Now.
Sure.
Yeah, the old firehouse. His name was Chief Vern John Doherty.
Yep. I met Vern when he was a captain.
That's right. He was the battalion chief. Was at Battalion 27 at that time,
Yeah.
up at Engine 70.
Yeah.
And he and I and my mom and dad and his wife and family, we got to be very, very close friends. In fact, we used to visit back and forth up in Wisconsin because he had a place in Twin Lakes and we were in Elkhorn.
Oh. Yeah.
But anyways, just before the assassination happened, before the riots started, that particular day, I had called him, and he and I would call each other back and forth quite a bit. And I had called him at the firehouse this day. And we're talking, and he says, John, I don't ever want you to come to this firehouse because of the neighborhood. He says, it's too dangerous. He says, call me on the phone. He says, but please don't come here. So I said, okay. So I called him several times, and this particular day I had called him, and we were talking on the phone about different things involving the fire department. All of a sudden, the bell rings. He says, John, he says, I gotta run. And I heard it coming over the radio, still in box alarm on Madison Street. And I hung up. I says, okay, Chief, good luck. He responded to the scene, and I guess there was so much going on, so much activity, that he got himself so worked up that he had a heart attack.
He had a heart attack and died.
right
Yeah.
there on the scene.
Yeah.
And I was the last person to talk to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll always remember that.
Yeah.
And God bless it. He lived on Austin Avenue somewhere. I think it was either between Belmont or around Belmont Avenue or around Diversity. But I know
Yeah.
he lived in a two-story house over there.
Yeah.
And I just cried because
Yeah.
that I lost a dear, dear friend.
He was a kind of a guy that he was a historian. He was a Lincoln historian. He was a Civil War historian. He was captain of 114 at Fullerton and Central Park, and I stopped by there one time because I talked to him on the phone, and we talked history for a couple of hours, you know. And he was very. He knew that Lincoln, for example, had a surrogate who came into the Civil War or something. Remember, you could hire someone. Or not hire,
a later president, not Lincoln. Grover Cleveland hired a substitute to go in and fight for him in the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought Lincoln had.
No,
he was
commander in
wasn't he?
chief. I mean,
No, well, no,
but
yeah,
he
but-
wasn't
But
eligible.
by
He
the
wasn't-
book, I think Lincoln did have to have. On paper.
On paper,
Somebody
somebody.
surveyed his
At
name. I
least
thought
he.
so,
That's
yeah,
what. That's
yeah.
what
I mean,
Chief
he was in
Doherty
his-
told me.
Because he's already in his 50s. I mean, he wouldn't have been
Well, that's a good point.
liable. For
Well,
age, yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
He's commander in chief.
Chief,
He's in the.
yeah.
He's the commander in chief of the army.
Yeah, he was already there, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but no.
maybe
Grover
it was in an early. Well, I don't know.
The draft of the Civil War provided that you could pay a substitute if you could find someone
Right.
who wasn't
Right.
liable to
Liable
serve
to be-
himself,
yeah.
and you could pay that individual to serve in your place.
$300.
And yes, it was. Yeah, what today it would
Yeah.
sound like, but in those
Legally,
days it was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Grover Cleveland did this,
Oh.
and it came back to haunt him politically because then it was used against him that he was
Sure.
a slacker and that he didn't serve his
Yeah.
country. And I think at the time his mother was an invalid and he was the only support for her. I mean, he had a legitimate reason why he didn't go off,
Yeah.
but it did come in because all the previous presidents had
They had all
apparently
ser-
had all been
all
Civil
served.
War veterans,
Yeah.
and now you have this
And generals,
this
yeah.
man running for office who not only wasn't a general, or he didn't serve at all, and he had paid a substitute, which by that point sounded horrible that he had paid someone else. But it was part of the Civil War draft law.
I think McKinley was the last Civil War veteran.
Civil
in the
War,
White
that's
House,
right.
yeah.
Although
After Cleveland, of course.
Although there's a technical footnote, and that is that Woodrow Wilson, as a young boy, on the wrong side of the war,
Georgia?
was working in a powder factory. He worked in a gunpowder factory as a young apprentice. So technically, you could argue that he had served in the Civil War, not in uniform, of course, but he had actually worked as a young boy during the war making gunpowder.
For whose side?
For the South, because he was.
For the South.
Oh, sure, because he was a South. Again, people don't realize that Woodrow Wilson was born and raised in the South.
Yeah.
And,
We don't think of him that way because he was
no.
what,
He was
president of Princeton.
President of
President of
Princeton, and
Princeton,
then governor of New Jersey. So
Right.
you think of him as a Northerner, but he was born and raised in the South. But you're right. William McKinley was the last Civil War veteran to actually serve as
You
president
know,
of the United States.
There was an article in the paper last year, and he said, I'm looking at all the streets downtown, and they're all named for presidents, but there's no Tyler. And so I wrote to them. I said there was a Tyler. Tyler was a small street between Van Buren and Harrison. It ran from State Street to Michigan Avenue and stopped. But there was a section of it west of the river. It's named Tyler. So at the when the Civil War came, Tyler was out of office, was I think appointed a representative in the Confederacy.
He was elected. He
or
was He was
elected.
elected to be a member of the so-called Confederate House of Representatives.
Yeah. And died before he
from
could.
Virginia.
From
Yeah,
Virginia.
he
died before he could
He never,
take
he
a
never
seat.
formally
Never
took
formally.
took his seat. Yeah.
But the Chicagoans disliked it so much they changed the street from Tyler to Congress Street, and then eventually extended. You got your hand up there, Jay?
Well, we're getting a signal from John wants to take a break. Before I do that, there's a Tyler Street. They got a lot of Italian restaurants over there on Tyler Street to this day.
To this day,
Very down Tyler Street.
Taylor.
Taylor.
Street.
This is Tyler.
Break time.
Okay.
Another break, gang. Take it away, John.
Yeah, that's not too